Thanks a lot for the nice introduction. Also thanked a lot of my acknowledgements to the organizer of this nice workshop for inviting me also for this talk. This talk is a bit different than the talks before. Why? First of all, I don't use DEM modeling, but secondly, it's not in this talk, the aim of the research was not that we want to have some bio-inspired geotechnics. It was more like that the zoologists I work with, you can see here, Sebastian Bisse, Dr. Bishop, Dr. Hepe, and Professor Prof from Kiel University. We had the aim to understand more physical or biology processes, or kind of why a certain type of animal, and in this case it's this antlion, behaves like behaving. So what is this antlion? So I brought you small videos. You see that there's an ant which falls down a slope, basically. You can see that there's something ambushing out of the sand. And this animal, which is there, is this antlion. And what you have seen was coming out of the sand, basically is this part. So this animal is known for that it's a predator, which captures some prey, basically ants or crickets, and it sits into a small pit, in a small sand pit, which it's building itself, it's constructing itself, the sand pit, and after constructing, it's put himself into the middle, mostly. And then it's waiting for some prey. And the interesting feature also is you see here all the small hairs, right? And these hairs are used by these antlions to detect the vibration on a sub-nanoscale on the sand to understand if there's prey or not. And this works so good, and this antlion doesn't need eyes, so that you can find in the literature also when the antlion is blind, you have the same efficiency to capture the prey than with eyes, for example. You see here the scale, this animal is not really large, yeah, but usually what interesting, or what was interesting, or is interesting for the geologist, that it's this head part. So basically everything up to here, yeah, this is the head. And what was interesting in this study is that this part is doing this sand throwing mechanism, right? So here a small motivation and overview of the research. Basically, it's this trap building is a highly specialized hunting strategy, and we know it mainly from spiders. So basically, some insects which use silk, and there's only few like worm lines and ant lines, which this research is focused here, which doesn't use silk at all. And when I saw the first time this video, we had a different kind of collaboration with this two research groups, and they showed me this video of this antlion, and then they were saying, we think, or the common theory is that by the sand throwing, they stress the animals, the prey, and basically we think that maybe the sand grain has some impact on the stability of the ant walking on the slope. And when I was looking at this video, it was rather interesting because I was seeing that the slope is kind of maintained to some critical slope. This was my first hypothesis, and at the end we kind of proved it as a spoiler. So, but we looked a bit into that. So that's how we was starting this nice collaboration together. And what we was doing for this research, basically we had 3 types of different things we did. So first of all, we did some escape experiments with a cricket. Why crickets, I will explain you. Then we did some behavioral antlion, and we filmed the antlions, what happens when it captures some prey. And last, we applied some finite element analysis with using a simple strength deduction method to check some simple hypotheses and assumptions of it. So what was the used material? The used material was a simple quartz sand, which you can buy in any warehouse, because we have read in the literature, or it was known from the literature, that the particle size is of non-interest for sand, as long as it doesn't get too small. So it gets, well, like if it gets into the part of the clay fraction, it's a bit of an issue. And also if it's dry, it's also not a problem. But this is the typical habitat of these animals. So you can usually find them in dry, sandy places. Even so, there's some other species of these insects which have slightly different habitats, but basically the main area of this habitat are sandy soils and having kind of around this grain size, which they really appreciate to build their pits, because there it's quite easy. All the sands have used in all these different experiments. And for some of the experiments where we have used artificial pits or artificial slopes, we have used them either with a funnel, or we had a box where we kind of simply had kind of a trapdoor problem there. The sand was flowing out to generate a nice pit, basically in the same, more or less the same size than the pit which was they usually built. So first of all, we're coming to this escape experiment. What we did here, you see here that this is like a standard ant terrarium. So where you usually have some ants which are building there and you can watch them. So it's a simply glass container with a really low value. And then you see here that we generate these slopes with a funnel. And what we did then was, without an antlion, we simply put this cricket in here. Why we used the cricket, even so the name of this insect is the antlion, because ants start crawling all over here at the wall, and this cricket usually doesn't do it too much. So that's why we use this cricket, which is also a common prey for this okay, I have problems. No. And then, so there was no antlion, and you can see simply by walking through the sand, this cricket, which it's rather fast here, is kind of moving the sand and is kind of flatten the slopes of this kind of, in a critical state, friction angle slope, this ends. So let's do it again. And this experiment was filmed for 12 hours. So you see that without any predator, so without any antlion, even then every movement of this cricket will change the topography of the slope. We have also done this, or my colleague did this also with a different kind of test. Also here we had an artificial slope. You see here that this is this pit, and here's the center. So the animal is trying to escape, the ant in this case, and it have really issues to do so because it's really steep. But finally, you will see that the ant is slowly escaping. But what you also see, if you look here, that there's always some sand moving where the ant is trying to walk out of the pit. And it's a hard fight for the ant to move out there, even so without any predator inside. But then finally, it works out. Okay, there it is. So here you see some of the results from this video we have captured, and then we also measured the slope inclination. So at the beginning it was 38 degrees in green. Yeah, you see the topology here at 0 hours. After 6 hours it has flattened out already to a certain extent, and after 12 hours it was much less, only from the cricket walking over the sand, so moving around the sand by this walking. So this means, and from that our hypothesis was, okay, there must be some good point for the antlion to keep the pit as unstable as possible. And what is this antlion doing, basically, based on the capturing process? Here you see a gray item, the ant, and here under there is sitting this antlion. And if you look at it and with some high-speed cameras, where we have done, so the antlion is moving his head, which you see here. This is his head. And by this head moving, he is throwing the sand particles. He is in the wrong direction, but the picture is really nice, so because the ant is here. And we have seen that this irritation of the antlion was maybe due to the point that we have this really thin 2D problem, and we are not sure maybe some of the waves usually this antlion catches based on his sensor-based hairs, that maybe he was getting some irritations based on the setup. And then you can see that his head moves, the sand particles are getting thrown out of the pit, and by that he's kind of maintaining this pit. Here you can see it again with a video where a cricket is inside. The cricket walks down, and then you see there again that really at the end of the video that he throws sand out around this area. And what you also see by this, if we run it a third time, that if you look at this slope here, that this soil is basically moving downwards here. And also he's maintaining basically the slope angle. And we have done a lot of experiments with these antlions and also the crickets, which is not too simple, and it was quite nice to see, because this world of natural science is quite different sometimes from civil engineering, as we doing. So we had a lot of antlions to kind of feed and bring to a certain status. And this was done, of course, by the colleagues from geology. And then they put it inside this ant terrarias. And then they measured initially the slope with kind of a lot of different tests. And then they could see after the throwing of the sand, the inclination was steeper than before. And here you see that, of course, there was some scatter into the data. But you see with this box, this plots, that it was before and after the increase of the slope angle was significant. And this kind of somehow proven that this sand sliding or this small landslide is kind of a mechanism to capture the prey more efficiently. And it's not basically that, of course, the prey will be stressed, but it's also not that the sand grain have a too large impact to the stability of the ant itself. And to confirm this, in addition, we did some final element strength reduction analysis. So basically we had the simple geometry, which you see on the left-hand side, right-hand side here, sorry. And what we did was a simple strength reduction method. So basically we applied a certain phi and so friction angle cohesion, and then we reduced this basically until we reach the failure. And based on this, we calculate this classical factor of safety, which we then use to investigate 6 different cases. So 2 of the cases you can see here was basically we reduced some volume up to here because the sand throwing introduced some volume losses. And the next thing we did, 2 different scenarios, was to loosen the sand. So basically to change slightly the parameters. So introducing a slightly smaller friction angle. And the case 5 and 6 was basically we combined both, because from our understanding and from the videos we took, we saw that the sand is thrown, so you reduce the volume or the area, the geometry, basically you change geometry. And on the other side also you loosen the soil in this area. So we introduced both. This we have used to calculate the factor of safety. You can see here, and there you can see basically when you already reduce a small amount of this geometry. So when you change this geometry in a small setup, you already get close to a failure. Yeah? And if you kind of consider that you loosen the soil only, you also get close to a failure. This is kind of already failing, or here you get close to a failure. But if you have this combined effect from a reduced soil or changed geometry and a more loose soil around where the antlion is ambushing or throwing the sand, then you get factor of safety which are really low, which means that the slide is kind of in a failure mode and sliding. So this means also the prey which walks on the slide is sliding down and can be captured then by this antlion. And basically that's the whole story we did in this research, which was really nice into this work with the zoologists. So to sum up, this antlion larvae built close to failure pit traps. The prey itself changed considerably the slope angle of the pit without that there is a predator. And by this sand throwing, also the predator cleaned up the pit and maintained a higher slope angle, which is kind of course, for him beneficial. And I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope you find it interesting, even so it was quite different to what was shown before. The reference and all the work we did is published here. And the main author of this study was Dr. Büsse. And these are my collaborators from Kiel University, which have mainly conducted the experimental part with dealing all the animals, and I was the observer of it. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.